Howdy, all of you delicious people. I'm here today to review Braindead 1992. Or, supposedly it also has another title, I guess only in America, called Dead Alive. For some reason, I went on to IMDb and there was another title to this movie called Dead Alive for whatever reason. I don't know. So, immediately once I start this review, I came to a realization when I had watched this film. I would say that I've kind of seen a barrage of everything. I feel that could be said about me. And here's how I can kind of really notch that down. I had seen a movie once where a guy was pleasuring a woman, and all of a sudden his tongue just starts stretching out like Stretch Armstrong, and then he eventually ends up going and cutting off his own tongue. And I was just like, okay, like after watching that scene, I feel like I have seen everything. And then I watched this film. The most creative zombie movie that I have ever seen in my life. And, like, we have some tip of the hats to freaking King Kong in this movie, because in the very beginning of this film, we're going to Skull Island to get the thing that eventually infects people. And I'm like, oh my god, this is a story. This is a story. Um, and so I now have just realized that maybe I haven't quite seen everything on Earth quite yet, and this has finally made me realize that. So, one thing that I immediately have to say is that this movie is not for everyone. This movie may be too gory or maybe too much of a gross out movie for a person to tolerate. Let's say that. So that way, if someone is to watch said thing, just be like, hey, then I'll be like, wait a minute, I said in beginning of Earth of Time and whatever, that I had said this movie is not for everyone. So, but go ahead and try to watch it and just be like, whoa, I've seen it all. Because here are some things that I've never seen in a movie before that goes on to be in here. So these zombies are absurdly difficult to destroy, kill, take care of, whichever. And so eventually we get to the point when eventually a zombie is to reattach its body parts to itself to try and keep on being a zombie, but it ends up just coming off as some kind of like transformer variation of itself. And I'm just like, all right, like this is interesting. Uh we eventually have our main character Lionel, who is to eventually take care of the zombies for whatever reason. And I'm like, what? Uh, but here are more things that I can talk about this film in a teeing up like fashion. Here is the goofiest thing that I have ever seen that is placed within this film, and there's a number of them. So we end up having a priest within this movie, and for anyone who has seen this film, you know what I'm talking about. All of a sudden, we have a priest in this film who is fighting in the style of seemingly Mortal Kombat. Like, this guy is freaking Bruce Lee, Jackie Channing, freaking a bunch of guys. And I am like, I have seen it all now. I have seen everything that I could possibly see in my life now that I have seen this film. But that's not all, folks. So, you know how I kind of mentioned that zombies, especially in this film, are absurdly hard to kill, destroy, whichever? It gets to the point in this film when a zombie is to separate himself, uh, like separate in between like his body, but then eventually all of a sudden one of the zombie's organs fall out of itself, and then all of a sudden a zombie's organs is coming after someone. And I'm like, wait a minute, what? A zombie's bodily organs is a thing. Here's the thing, folks. Almost everything that is to be done in this movie at some point, you would naturally think that another movie would just take one piece of what they do here and put it in their own zombie movie. Like you would think, like Dawn of the Dead 2004 would have taken one piece of this film and done their thing in Dawn of the Dead 2004 with the whole baby zombie thing. Because this movie is the zombie kitchen sink thing where Peter Jackson could just say, like, anything to do with zombies, Peter Jackson could just be like, oh, they stole that idea from me. From this movie. Because this movie has it all. Just, like, especially what ends up happening to Vera or Lionel's mother in this movie. And we also have this goofy side story with Lionel's mother also. And I'm just like, okay, all right. But anyways, so, but the main thing is to eventually have Lionel eventually mix it up with this one girl who I think I'm probably just gonna call her Maria because I don't think that I'm probably going to easily be able to pronounce her first name, which is Paquita. If I'm even saying that ballparkingly correct. Like, I think I'm just going to end up saying, like, Maria Sanchez, or maybe just call her Sanchez, because that's her last name, technically. So yeah. So, this movie has everything, and for anyone who is eventually going to try and see if they can watch this movie, and are questioning their tolerance of things, there's going to be a pudding moment in this film that I would just say, like, maybe not watch the whole pudding thing. Just wait till the whole pudding situation is over. And then... Because, that is just... There was a point in which where I was like, gross. But hey, I watched, and even I was like, So anyways, going into this film, a lot of people were just like, hey man, it's effects and it's whatever. A lot of people would have probably just been like, hey man, I was fine with this film. I've seen this countless times. And there's a lot of people that have, like, seen this weirdly countless times, which is, like, because they're like, man, this is the funniest, fun zombie film that I've ever seen that has freaking King Kong references in it. And also, the King Kong remake ties in this movie, which I went and I also saw like Cinemasker do the review of this, and they mentioned that in the review, which I just like was like, okay, like I guess Cinemasker talked about this. So, anyways, going into this, let's go out of our way to say it's that customary time again. Let's go into spoilers about this movie, so I can talk about how any of the stuff that I mentioned is actually tied into this film. So let's go into it. Let's go into spoiler time. Spoiler time. It's about that time I'm going to spoil this movie. So this is the end all be all zombie film. And so after this, if I ever go into one of these kinds of films again, I will just be like, well, this is the really looser or easier version to tolerate. That's not the right word. It's a easier, just cheaper version of this movie. So let's go into it. Let's go into spoiler time. Spoiler time. It's about that time we spoil this movie. So we have this beginning of the film that takes place bizarrely in Skull Island, where we end up having this guy who is to go with these guys from this island, I guess, who are his travel agent people, whichever. And so these two Americans end up going and grabbing this rat monkey and putting it in this cage. But evidently this cage isn't really all that cracked up to be. It's kind of a flimsy cage. So eventually, while these guys were driving off, just running for their lives to get the heck out of this island, because there are to be these tribal people trying to stop these guys from taking this rat monkey for whatever reason. What ends up happening is these guys do get away, but all of a sudden, the cage is to knock into the main guy who had tried to steal this rat monkey, and all of a sudden, this guy is to get scratched. So immediately, the traveler guys that are with this guy is just to be like, oh my god, he's infected. We need to chop off his hand, and so of course they do. And then they realize that he has another scratch on his other arm, so they cut off his arm. And so then also they end up seeing a scratch upon this guy's forehead. And guess what happens? So they just chop the crap out of this guy. And the next scene we end up seeing is that this rat monkey, I guess, is taken to other country, I guess, considering that this is to be a British film, then the UK, I guess? I don't know. I don't know what exactly the setting is. I'm not going to say America because, like, the very beginning of this movie, you end up seeing, like, the British flag and whatever. Like, hey, whichever. So, no offense. Like, I'm not going to say this is an American film. So anyways, pushing on. So we end up having this guy who ends up coming into this store and is to mention that this woman has a really nice dress, and that is to be the girl that I will call Maria. And so Maria is to ask her grandmother if him and this guy are, or if Maria and this guy are going to end up together. And so all of a sudden, like, grandmother busts out the tarot cards and is to try to read, of course, Maria's fortune. And she's like, well, you're going to find your, like, white knight, but it's not going to be that guy. So you are going to get someone soon. And supposedly the way of which that you can understand who this guy is is there's going to be a star symbol that is going to help you realize that uh, that'll be the guy that is to be your loved one. So all of a sudden, I think we have her like father or her grandfather, who's to say like, well, hopefully he has money, whatever, because that's all that guy cares about. So all of a sudden, there's to be Lionel, who ends up going to this grocery store, and evidently this guy is severely clumsy because he ends up dropping everything of fruit while he is to just stand anywhere. So Lionel is to be calling for an order, uh, like for his mother, and so it seems Lionel is absurdly clumsy to the point of all of a sudden there being these mixture of things being presented together. And so when both Lionel and Maria are to kind of look at this symbol, it ends up being into a symbol of a star. And so Maria then is like, oh my god, like Lionel, I guess, is to be my white knight or my lover. And so like Maria eventually starts to seek out Lionel and is like, we're fated to be together kind of thing. And Lionel's like, I don't know about that. We end up having Lionel, who has this weird, like, almost like Norman Bates psycho kind of moment with his mother, where it just seems that Lionel should have been driven crazy at some point. Because so we end up having Lionel, who is to go home, and his mother is like talking about there are to be some important people coming, and they and I guess Vera is to have this WW whatever L thing, whatever goofy thing that is to be coming to this home, weirdly, for some reason. So Vera is to mention how spotless that this house needs to be, and Lionel is like, dude, I've already dusted numerous times over, and Vera is like, well, you didn't cut the grass, and so, like, it's just like, okay, like, I think I've done enough. Like, how about, like, considering Vera, how rich Vera supposedly is, why doesn't she have like maids or butlers or any number of people, like pay anybody to do all of this work if they are supposedly so rich, like they are to seem to eventually say that they are somewhere in this movie? But I guess that's just me, right? So Lionel is going and cutting the grass, and all of a sudden we have this dog that jumps his fence and pushes him over, and like this dog is looking all over him, and he's like, okay, like get away. So all of a sudden he ends up bumping into Maria again, and so he's like, oh hey, hi, how's it going? And so like Maria's like, oh, do you like my dog? And Lionel's like, yeah, I'm just fine. I like him just fine. So, but I think I'm also getting ahead of myself. So, Lionel is to, let's back up a little bit. Uh, so Lionel and Maria are to go to this zoo. And so they end up going to the zoo together. And so it seems that Lionel is really having a good time. Both Lionel and Maria are to kiss. Like, at first it's to be this little kind of smooch thing, but then all of a sudden it becomes this, like, ooh, let me go in a little bit longer there, get a little bit of smooching a little bit more, you know what I'm saying? So, all of a sudden, both Maria and Lionel are at this monkey exhibit, and all of a sudden there's to be this small other exhibit that is to be the rat monkey. And I'm like, why would these things be so close to one another, weirdly and bizarrely? So, All of a sudden, these monkeys are chucking this apple at the people, and so the girl chucks the monkey back into the cage. All of a sudden, we have the rat monkey who ends up going and grabbing the apple and eats it, but then I guess is not satisfied with the apple and decides to go and attack one of the other monkeys that are seemingly close by and creates a very gross moment, which eventually, like, there is to be sadly a monkey that dies. And so it seems we end up having a zookeeper-ish like guy going and grabbing the remains of this monkey and uh, just kind of talking to things about these people. And I'm just like, okay, this is so weird. So all of a sudden, evidently, Vera is to also be at this zoo, and she is to be following around her son because she realizes that he is to be at the zoo with his girl. And so all of a sudden, Vera is to get too close to this monkey cage to all of a sudden get attacked by this rat monkey and get bitten. And she ends up getting bitten on the arm, and like she screams bloody murder. Eventually, the rat monkey is to let go, and then Vera ends up squishing the head of this rat monkey with her heel. So, uh, monkey lovers, I apologize for the whole like monkey thing that I mentioned there, but it happens in the film. I'm just saying what happens in the film. Please don't hurt me or hit buttons that just like say that you don't like something. I'm saying what happens in the film. I could skip what happens in the film and not say something, but then eventually someone will watch this film and be like, hey, I didn't like this scene and he didn't mention this and whichever. Being honest. So eventually what ends up happening is Vera is to have this, of course, get infected upon her arm. And so she ends up going and is to be sick, and then eventually ends up having to go and do this whole meeting with these big la-di-da executive whatever people from this organization. And here is when we get the soup moment, where, or not the soup moment, the pudding moment, where like it didn't bother me during the movie, but now having to like remember it and remember like some of this stuff, like I didn't at once like really just have a problem with this film. Like I kind of like in my head every bit and second of this, I was like, it's all fake. Like, it shouldn't bother you. Um, but it's also just the fact that it's like there's some spots where I'm just like, ew, it's kind of gross. Um, but yeah, but like for me, in my mind, I always play off that it's fake. Like, that's where, like, you have a lot of times where I won't get scared in a movie just because it's like you always have like that head game where you're just like, dude, you've seen this before, and like, and you also know that all of this is to be just fake, imaginary, whatever. So like, go through and watch any movie and just be like, you know what, like all this is fake. All that's rubber, like obviously, and whichever. But anyways, so we end up having Vera, who's bizarrely having a deeper voice. It sounds weird. But here's the thing. The people that were at this table besides Lionel were to mention later on that she was like the picture of health. The woman was kind of gagging or starting to get really sick. But that's not all, folks. Before I don't think I'm going to mention the skin thing. I'm not even going to mention that. I'm not going to mention the skin. Um, but I'll mention the ear. So, because Vera is starting to lose some skin, and I'm not talking about like high five skin. You know what I mean? Um, and but then she also drops an ear in her pudding, and we're just Vera eats her own ear. Moving on. Moving on. That's also not the worst thing of it all. There's also a thing where eventually someone is to eat or consume some droplets of blood or whatever is coming from Vera's arm and not even realize it. And but yeah, gross. But let's move on. Let's move on from this scene. Cause like if anything, the more that I think about it, the more that it will just like, yeah, this bothers me. So let's move on, and it shouldn't, because it really doesn't. Um, but the more that I have to imagine it in my head, because that's the thing. Because I like to like replay scenes. That's how I can easily do a review. Is I have to like re-see the scene in my head to go and talk about it, because I'm a very visual person. So yeah, I don't want to have that image ever in my head again. Let's move on. So because again, it's all like cornstarch and whatever, but still, um, like that is the only part that bothers me in this whole film is that gross scene. So pushing on. Uh, so uh, eventually, Lionel's mother eventually goes to bed after that whole meeting because she's still ill. She's still sick. She had to like rush to put her makeup on and everything like that to get ready for this. So eventually, Lionel's mother is to be sent back to bed to think that like she's just gonna get over this. It's gonna happen. That she's just gonna just pull through. And we had like Vera like sleeping, and bizarrely like this girl's heart I think was like pumping like weirdly and bizarrely to eventually I guess say that she's gonna eventually turn into a zombie, I guess. So we all of a sudden eventually have Vera who's going and trying to like quickly grab all of this meat. Everywhere she's to see meat, she's to grab it. She's a person to go into the kitchen and just grab all this meat to eat. And so Lionel's like, man, this is getting out of hand. So all of a sudden, so Maria is to, like I said, bring her dog over. And so all of a sudden the dog ends up getting into the house because Lionel wants to just talk to Maria in the house. And so uh and so Lionel is like talking about his mother, and like it seems like she's sick and blah 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 blah. So eventually we end up having the dog end up going into the home and ends up going into Vera's room. And so they end up going after the dog to find out that the mother had consumed this dog. And then Maria is upset because, oh my god, you're like, your mother ate my dog? And so Lionel's like, well, not all of it. It's a weird thing to just say, but okay. Like, we not only have the moment where, like, Lionel is pulling some dog out of Vera's mouth, and again, that might be a point in time where people might say, you know what, this movie is not for me. At some point or another, but hey, if people have good tolerance, then continue to just have me describe this movie. So eventually, what ends up happening is that Vera just starts to attack people and of course is to attack Lionel. And all of a sudden, both Lionel and Vera are to all of a sudden go and take a tumble down the stairs, and then all of a sudden that's the point when uh, Vera actually passes away. Like she is to eventually go and to transform into zombie. So all of a sudden Lionel is to tell Maria to go and get the nurse, and so the nurse ends up coming, and so the nurse checks on Vera and is to tell Lionel, it's like, I'm sorry kid, but I guess she's dead. And so the nurse is taking an absurd amount of time to try to comfort Lionel. And so the nurse is like, hey, like, I'll take care of this. Like, you won't have to do much of anything. Like, I'll make sure that, like, all of this is, like, set up for you. Like, I'll figure all of this out. I'll help you. And so while this nurse is trying to comfort Lionel about his mother's death, all of a sudden, the mother is to come back alive and is to go and infect this nurse. And eventually, this nurse is to have her head seemingly come off and just kind of like fall from behind of her. But then eventually, there's these parts where like she can put her head back up and whichever, because it's kind of like this kind of flimsy back and forth kind of business. So Lionel is starting to realize that all these people are now zombies, and so he's trying to defend himself, but anything that he is to use to try to stab them in the head, nothing works. Weird, bizarre items. Like, he ends up stabbing the nurse in the head with this weird, bizarrish bird thing, and does nothing, but now she just has this weird bird piece of a thing in her head for the rest of this film. So Lionel just decides that he has this basement with this pretty sturdy door, and so he just ends up deciding to open this door, tossing these women down into this basement, and locks the door, and thinks that he can just avoid all of this easily. And so eventually Maria is to come and try to console Lionel about all this, and to just see like what the update was. And Lionel's like, oh well, my mother's gonna go to the hospital for a couple days. And you would think then like Lionel would just be like, hey Maria, how about you and me, bang a bang, you know what I'm saying? But you have zombies in your house that you weirdly have to take care of. Because here's the thing. So eventually what ends up happening is Lionel goes to this quack of a veterinarian that ends up selling endlessly Lionel these tranquilizer like containers or things that are to, I guess, have Lionel be able to take from needles and inject these zombies with these tranquilizers so they can continue to seemingly go to sleep, so that he doesn't have to deal with them. So what ends up happening is consistently whenever Lionel is to be with these zombies, he ends up figuring out how to tranquilize them and have them fall asleep. So eventually Lionel is to go off onto the town and do some stuff, and all of a sudden Vera ends up breaking through this door and going out all over the town. She ends up getting hit by this bus, and she ends up going flying into the store of which that both Lionel and Maria are in. She ends up crashing through the door, and we have Lionel who ends up going and putting a tranquilizer in her nose. And so now everybody is to finally see that this woman is dead within public. So they go and they're now trying to do a whole like funeral for her, and So it seems that Lionel is having a long delay of wanting to do this whole funeral. So we're here's also the weird thing. So it seems like these people were doing like weird stuff with this body also, which eventually Lionel was to see them do. But so eventually Lionel goes and his mother is in this coffin, and all of a sudden, like his mother ends up waking up, crashing through the coffin, and now he's trying to tranquilize her again to make sure that she's dead. So they're like, okay, like this is weird. We also have Lionel, who has this uncle who just has the weirdest hairstyle. But not only that, like he's just kind of an unsavory character that is to eventually be this like sleazy guy who's consistently hitting on Maria because she's good looking. She's Maria. but uh but like this guy obviously is too sleazy for this woman. Plus also this guy's hairstyle is just the curliest, weirdest thing. But then we end up finding out later that he's actually just wearing a wig on top of his head. I'm like, you know what? You could probably rock a sweet bald head. Why are you having hair up there, buddy? But like whatever. Like hey, like freaking. I guess not all of everyone can rock a sweet bald head at some point, right? Because you probably have to. Because moving on. So, uh, so pushing on. So they bury Vera, and so Lionel is to go and unbury his mother because, of course, like she's just going to rise from the grave regardless, and eventually come after, uh, and kill people. So Lionel's doing the good thing by trying to unbury his mother and I guess tranquilize her and bring her home. So while that's going on, we all of a sudden have these like greaser looking motherfuckers that have these like biker jackets and like greaser, like if you guys of course remember like the Grease movies, like John Travolta and all that jazz. Like we have these guys all of a sudden are to think that Lionel is to be grave robbing, and he's like, no, I'm not doing that at all. So all of a sudden these guys think that this guy is to be like a grave robber or a grave humper or whatever. So they all of a sudden like are gonna beat this guy up, and because they think that it's the right thing to do. And so all of a sudden there's to be one guy who is peeing over Vera's grave, and so all of a sudden we end up having Vera who ends up reaching out her hand from the grave and is to pull this guy in to the grave and rip out part of his skin to where you just kind of see his bones and his organs, and she just quickly and easily zombifies him, and eventually there is to be another person that ends up getting zombified. So all of a sudden Lionel is trying to like back up with his tranquilizer to eventually defend himself. And then all of a sudden, like the preacher is coming out of his place and he's like, hey, what's going on here, you rascally rascals? And then all of a sudden he ends up seeing the zombies and he's like, oh, like I guess the devil is working tonight or something, like some weird thing like that. And so all of a sudden we have this priest who is just beating the crap out of all these zombies. Like he's tearing off arms from one of the zombies and beating the other zombie to death with them. And he's like just like roundhouse kicking everybody and freaking just like it's a sight to see, that's for sure. You have this priest that is just going and kicking everybody and whichever, but eventually what ends up happening is this guy ends up kicking like a head off of somebody's body, and all of a sudden that head ends up going flying and ends up going and biting this priest onto the shoulder, and then he's like, ah! And so all of a sudden one of the zombies go and toss this priest onto this one statue, where all of a sudden this hand is coming through his chest, so he's dead. And so Lionel is seeing all this, and he's like, "Dude, I'm gonna get the frick out of here! Like, this is crazy." But then he ends up coming and collecting every single one of these zombies, even the preacher now, and is supposedly taking care of them by consistently giving them tranquilizer. Like, he ends up giving them like tranquilizer food, which, like, these zombies don't even know how to eat things, and so he's trying to teach them how to eat with like spoons and whatever. And so eventually that leads to all of a sudden the preacher zombie and the nurse zombie. The preacher is to be touching the nurse's zombie's leg, and then the nurse is like, huh? And the preacher's like, hmm. And so all of a sudden, Lionel is to get a knock on the door, and it's his uncle. And so all of a sudden, like, his uncle is just kind of like talking about, man, it's a sad thing that happened to your mother, right? Because his uncle is to realize that Lionel is to basically get everything, that he's kind of left with like the whole estate and everything. And so reasonably, like, Lionel is just wanting to, like, dude, I really want to figure out how I can get a slice of that pie, because if he's rich, I want to figure out how I can be rich. So what ends up happening is that, like, Lionel's uncle is to eventually hear some moaning going on, some very creative moaning going on. And so Uncle, I think his name is Uncle Les. Uncle Les is saying, like, hey, like, I guess you might have just stumbled upon your father's uh like dirty movies or something, hey? Like, and Lionel is like, don't talk bad about my dad. And so all of a sudden, like, he's hearing like things going on, and so, like, his uncle is just like, hey man, like, I guess you just have to grieve in your own way. Like, I'll just leave you to whatever you're doing, and I'll just I'll just leave. And so Lionel ends up going into the kitchen to find out that two zombies are just going at it right in front of these other zombies. And so Lionel tries to separate the two, because evidently they're heavily kissing, but it seems that the nurse ends up ripping off the face skin of the preacher and eats it. So eventually, Lionel, after all these zombies are tranquilized, he just puts them down in the basement, and we end up finding out that the nurse is to be zombie pregnant with child. And when eventually Lionel goes down there, he eventually finds a zombie baby in this radio. And so Lionel ends up trying to treat this baby like a normal baby, but he has this like weird stroller that he ends up kind of like flinging all over the place, because he ends up like is not able to easily handle this stroller. And so he ends up trying to duplicate or copy what a normal woman with a stroller baby thing has. And he ends up just like, dude, like, this is a wildly different kind of thing that I'm having to deal with. So all of a sudden, Lionel is getting so not in control of this stroller, to eventually it unleashing this baby, because he supposedly had tried to like barb wire this baby into the stroller, and it didn't work out. So all of a sudden the baby ends up getting loose and almost going and attacking someone. And so all of a sudden Lionel then grabs it and puts it in this little bag of a thing, and is to just like be chucking it around and hitting it against things, and all of a sudden everybody's like, "Oh my god, that man is doing horrible things to his child." It's like it's a freaking zombie baby, but no one realizes that. So evidently he just tells the women that it's a very hyperactive active child, and it's like, okay, whatever. So eventually we just have like Lionel just like trying to take care of this new zombie baby. So weird. So uh eventually what ends up happening is we keep having these moments where Lionel wants to consistently keep this relationship up with Maria, but he's also just like, maybe this is a mistake, maybe I should do this, maybe I shouldn't do this, but eventually he's just like, no, I think I just need to be with this woman, and then he kisses her and he just can't stop doing that kind of thing. To where eventually towards the end of the movie, even when they're covered in zombie juices, like they're still just kissing it out, and I'm like, ow. Like I'm just waiting for both of them, for all the stuff that they had to deal with, for them, either one of them, to eventually have become a zombie as well, but I guess they just didn't for whatever reason. So anyways, pushing on. So eventually, Uncle Les is to eventually sneak into Lionel's home and eventually find out that there are dead bodies in his basement. And so Uncle Les is just like, here's my time. Like, here's to figure this out. That I can go and swindle this guy and get a chunk of this estate and get a chunk of money. So, so we have Uncle Les who's like, "Ha, I figured you out." And Lionel's like, "Oh no, that's not what it seems like," because they're still alive, but he doesn't know that. And so Uncle Les is just like, "Well, hey man, like go ahead and just go and bury those bodies, uh, because I want them buried. Get rid of them." Because Uncle Les, now that he has this bargaining tool, all of a sudden Uncle Les just starts this whole entire party, I guess, from everyone in town, because Uncle Les is just a guy that everyone wants to party with for whatever reason. I don't get it either. But yeah, so Uncle Les just brings in all of these people, and they have this massive party. And Lionel is just like, oh my god, eventually, when is this going to turn god awful? And so eventually, what ends up happening is we end up, of course, having like people like starting to open doors that they probably shouldn't. And so eventually there is to be one zombie who kind of ends up like slipping into the party. But then we also have Uncle Les who ends up taking um, Lionel because he's just getting really annoyed with him. Because Uncle Les is to say some crap about Lionel's father, and Lionel's like, "Don't say that about my dad." And so Uncle Les can think that he can get away with murder at this point. So, and say whatever, and this kid will just have to deal with it. But Lionel's like, no, I'm not going to. So eventually, Uncle Les is just to be so frustrated with this guy that he ends up just chucking him into the basement with these zombies. And then Uncle Les goes and grabs Maria and thinks that he can finally have his way with her. But Maria ends up freaking kicking this guy in the nuts. And like I thought that was hilarious, but Uncle Les still goes and chucks Maria into the basement also. So, and then he ends up like taking like a bottle of whatever to his junk. So all of a sudden we end up having Maria, who is to eventually go down into this basement and realize that all of these people are to still be zombies. And so Lionel has to kind of confess to Maria about, like, hey, like, all these people, like, they're my mother, they're the preacher, they're all the people that I've known, and I can't just, like, kill all of these things. It's not right. So eventually what ends up happening is Maria is to tell Lionel, because supposedly this guy had this card where supposedly he had been surrounded by death for whatever reason, and I guess this makes a lot of sense. So Maria is to convince Lionel to kill all these zombies by poisoning them, and so he ends up going and deciding to do all that. So he poisons every single one of them and then buries all of them. He's like, well, I guess that's a wrap, right? But that just eventually just like accelerates them coming out of the grave even quicker and being much more like seemingly energetic than they ever had before. Uh, oh, and Lionel had gotten all this from some goofy quack that is to be this, I guess, German uh, doctor for whatever reason. So all of a sudden, these zombies are to basically be much stronger than what they were. And so all of a sudden, they break through this door and they just start chomping through everybody and killing everyone. And so all of a sudden, everybody is trying desperately as humanly possible to get out of this party or to try to find a place where they can eventually be safe. And like everybody is getting freaking taken. There was this one part where there was to be this one guy's fist that went through somebody's like back of their head to go in through their mouth, and I'm like, oh my god, like I have never seen that before in my life, but now I have seen it here, and it was so interesting. But I was like, that is such a weird thing. Um, so yeah, like people are getting torn apart, and it's crazy, but it is what it is. It's a crazy zombie film where people are just getting freaking like their bodies torn apart by zombies and whichever they're getting infected and so on and so forth. So eventually we have this moment where eventually Uncle Les is trying to get out of the building. Then he desperately wants to get back in. And Maria and this other girl is just be like, dude, we're not going to help you get back in here. But then he desperately pleads for them to get back in there. And so they let him in. And like Lionel is bizarrely like all over the goddamn place in this movie. Like eventually he ends up going and he's to try to like defend or help these people when eventually they get zombies, but he eventually ends up all over the place. There's this one spot that eventually he's to end up in this bathroom, and eventually the zombie that's kind of just barely hanging on with his faculties of body. Eventually, his body ends up separating from his legs to his like upper half, and so this zombie is trying to get at Lionel, who's in this bathroom, and what eventually ends up happening is all of his organs end up falling out uh, while this zombie is still trying to get Lionel into this tub. And so eventually, Lionel is to shove the zombie into this toilet and consistently try to flush him, or the zombie technically tries and flushes himself. So all of a sudden, the organs are trying to, like I guess the intestines or whatever, the long stretch of things are eventually trying to grab on to Lionel. And so eventually we get like this weird spot of this organ trying to grab at Lionel consistently. But we and I want to try to see if I can get everything in here, but there's a lot, especially when we get this like whole party thing going on. There's just a lot of just stuff to cover. So eventually it gets so bad that Lionel tries and heads into the attic. Uh, and so he eventually ends up going through these these boxes and these things, and so he ends up uncovering uh, that there were some photos that his father had taken, sleeping with some other woman, or seemingly being having an affair with some other woman. And so Lionel, I guess, was to have some kind of story that his father had drowned, I guess. But we ended up finding out that Vera, who's Lionel's mother, ended up killing both Lionel's father and the woman of which that uh, Lionel's father was having an affair with. She ended up killing both of them, evidently. So, because we uncover that truth from eventually massively giant, monstrous looking zombie Vera, which once I saw this, I'm like, what? Like, this body is just, and you can see parts. You can see part 10 things. You can see uh, some tatas. You could see, and I'm just like, and the face is just all like a mangled mess of thing. And this is what happens at the end. We'll get there. If I can remember all of this stuff that ends up happening in this moment, because there's so much stuff to talk about. But yeah, Uncle Les ended up going outside before heading back in, and he ends up trying to attack zombies with a gnome. There ended up being this one headless zombie, and so Uncle Les ended up shoving the gnome into the head of the severed zombie. And so we just have a zombie with a severed head that is to have a gnome on top of it. I'm like, this is so weird. It's so weird, but also so funny. Um, but yeah, so Lionel goes back into the home, and so they end up having a zombie where all of a sudden Maria is to shove this zombie into this light bulb. And so now we have a zombie that is to be like a jack-o'-lantern looking zombie. And I'm just like, you have got to be kidding me. We have a jack-o'-lantern zombie that has eyes and like, but like when the zombie opens its mouth, like there's light coming throughout this whole entire face. I'm just like, that is so interesting, but so weird. And so eventually we have so Lionel is in the attic. Let me pause here for just a quick second. And we're back. So Lionel is in the attic, and so eventually he ends up getting attacked with a bodily organ part of zombie. And so that all of a sudden accidentally has him fall through the ceiling, but fall through the ceiling while hanging on to this light fixture that is to be attached to jack-o'-lantern light zombie. And so you just see this zombie kind of like flying up the wall, and then it stops. So we just excuse me. We just have Lionel that is all of a sudden just dangling in the air, and the intestines are starting to grab onto Lionel, and he ends up bizarrely biting these intestines, and so that way it stops grabbing onto him. And so he's just kind of like dancing around, like flinging around onto here. And so all of a sudden, like Maria and the girl that she was with eventually have to make a break for it. Uncle Les was trying to bizarrely have these like cleavers and just chop all these zombies up into little small bits and pieces. But then eventually he ends up going into the basement to get attacked by giant Vera monster, and so he ends up getting killed that way. So Maria and the girl that she was with end up trying to run up the stairs to eventually get attacked by zombies, and so Lionel is trying to protect Maria, and but he's still just kind of dangling. So eventually, what ends up happening is Lionel starts like kind of flinging around so much so that eventually he ends up going and flying through a window, and we're assuming that he's dead at this point. We're assuming like, okay, I guess there goes the hero of this story. So all of a sudden Maria and her friend are just trying to like figure out how to just like go through these zombies and whatever. There's to be this one like chopped in half like head from like upper part of mouth here, like up of one zombie, and like they're bizarrely like doing like kick the head weirdly through here. So and eventually Maria just blends that part of that head and kills it off. Cause all of a sudden like Maria is just starting to like blend zombie stuff. Like I guess that's her way of just getting and killing these things, is just to blend the pieces. Because I guess these zombie blood things won't reform into anything. So eventually Maria and her friend just thinks that all is lost, that there's too many zombies in here. They might as well just naturally assume they're going to die at this point. All of a sudden, we end up having Lionel come back in here with the lawnmower like strapped to his body, and like the lawnmower blade is now spinning in front of him, and he's holding the lawnmower blade or the lawnmower to have the blade be like out so it attacks and churns up all of these zombies. And he's like, the party's over. And freaking he goes in. I'm like, yeah. Freaking he's got the lawnmower going. He's holding it up like crazily. Like, I wonder how they did that scene, because I'm just like, I would be so worried if I was this guy that that this, like, I wouldn't be able to hold this thing up. It would be too strong of a thing to hold. And I would love to eventually just ask how that was done. So that way, like, I could like have the thing of mind to just be like, okay, this guy like was safe while doing this. Because I'm sure like the parts of which that they cut it, where there was probably like certain kind of parts where there was lesser lawnmower parts on this thing, and so like Lionel didn't have to like hold so many parts of this. But anyways, so Lionel just goes through and just mows down literally a lot of these zombies with this blade, and just chops them up in little bits and pieces. And I'm just like, wow, this is really cool for whatever reason. And so like eventually there's to be like people behind him, and so he ends up turning and just going through here, just mowing all these things down. Like you just see this entire room just either filled up with blood or just body parts from any number of things. So let's get to the big finish. So we end up having to deal with Vera and Vera Monster. So where Lionel was to have been just taking apart all these zombie characters, all of a sudden Vera is to be coming like from the bottom of this floor up, and she like makes her way through here, and this woman is not wearing one, this monsterish thing is not wearing one stitch of clothes, so you're seeing stuff, but face is mangled, but you're seeing stuff. So all of a sudden, like Lionel and Maria are not prepared to fight or figure out how to attack uh, Vera monster thing. Oh, there was to also be the moment where uh, like half of zombie was fighting uh, Lionel, and so all of a sudden, like uh, Lionel was trying to gear up the lawnmower, and it wasn't working. And so, coincidentally, in perfect timing, Lionel had the lawnmower backwards, and he just goes and takes the uh, the zombie and then just chucks it onto the lawnmower. So the lawnmower just kind of blenders the zombie and just like and does it that way, kills the zombie that way, where it just kind of cuts through the zombie as the zombie is kind of like fallen onto the zombie lawnmower blade. That was hard to explain. Um, but there was a very interesting action sequence that was taking place with Lionel trying to figure out how to start this lawnmower, and like the zombie is like a half bodied zombie. That was really interesting. I thought that that was a really cool sequence. Go ahead and check that out in the movie if you get to this far of part. But so I think we have like the baby zombie, like Maria tried to blend it, but the baby zombie got away. I think the baby zombie ends up getting killed when eventually the house is just to be burnt down. So now we're going to be. I think I've kind of covered most of the like the big details. There's going to be so many things I didn't remember because there's so much things going on in this movie. So let's wrap it up. So we have now Vera monster zombie thing, and so eventually Lionel and Maria decide that they're going to go and they're going to climb up to the rooftop of this house via uh, the chimney stack. So they end up kind of crawling up from that, and but the Vera monster ends up crashing from the roof, and so now Lionel is having to face his zombie mother. And there was this one part where Vera was to talk about Maria and say that she was experienced, and that's why Lionel should never date this woman because she's supposedly experienced. Which there's no real way to prove that. Like he could have probably asked her if she's ever been with anybody, but he didn't. So, so eventually Lionel is just to be like, you know what? Like, I'm not afraid of you anymore, mother. Like, I know that you had killed my father and the woman that he was having an affair with. And so, like, I am just no longer going to put up with your crap. Like, I'm just not going to deal with you anymore because you had kept that secret from me. You had lied to me all these years and whatever. And so what ends up happening is this house is really starting to burn down. And so eventually Lionel is to all of a sudden be consumed by the chest of this monster, all while Maria is just kind of hanging on to the side of this roof. And the monster is now trying to pick off Maria's fingers so that way she'll slip off the roof and probably die. And so all of a sudden, we just naturally assume again Lionel is dead again, and Maria is mourning Lionel's loss, thinking that he's dead because this woman's chest weirdly opened up and consumed Lionel. What a weird, what a weird like thing that this is. Where like when really thinking about it, like Lionel's mother was pregnant with him, and then eventually for Lionel to eventually like become a man again, he had to he had to exit from out of body of his mother. What a weird thing. Anyways, so because Lionel goes and has this weird medallion that he is to have gotten from Maria's mother, and that's how he ends up cutting his way back out of his mother, and then he gets out, and then his mother is seemingly in pieces, and so she ends up falling back into the house and burns up, and so all the zombies are all burning in the house, whatever's left of these zombies, and so eventually both uh, Maria and Lionel find this little like I'm assuming phone line or something like that to eventually go and like zip line and to drop uh, and to be safely away from this house while watching it burn. We have like firefighters who are basically getting set to like save this house, but I would have Lionel just be like, dude, let it burn. Like let the whole entire thing burn. Um, Cause yeah, freaking let all those zombies make sure everything is freaking dead. I don't want one finger, hand, nothing coming out of that thing. So just make sure everything is nice and crispy. Do not try to save this home for 1 second. But yeah, so really at the end of this movie is just both Lionel and Maria kissing and they walk off from this home. I'm still assuming because Lionel is still going to be rich and it's not all tied to this home. I'm assuming that he's going to make it out pretty good, especially if insurance from this home probably kicks in because. But I don't know if zombie invasion is covered in insurance, so maybe he got effed. But I'm sure he just might be rich enough for it to really not matter. But here's the good thing though, this guy got from out of his mother to then go and be with Maria, and so that's the best thing because we had a moment where Lionel and Maria were technically going at it while his mother was to be getting infected with the zombie virus, and because what ended up happening was they ended up having this Romeo and Juliet moment where Maria was to give Lionel his coat back and to say it's like, well, maybe we should not do this. Maybe we should break up. And then eventually, while Maria was almost going to leave, like Lionel's like, no, like we can't do this. Like we have to just be together forever. Because weirdly, Maria was to say we're like we're destined. Like we have to be together forever. Like it's in the cards, so to speak. So eventually, Lionel and Maria have this like kissing moment in his bed. But then eventually, I guess Maria ends up kind of like leaving, and then Lionel is to eventually get ready for the next day or whatever. So I think that I've covered most of this movie. Maybe it's not perfect. Maybe it's Maybelline or whatever. I don't know. But I think I'm gonna get out of here. I think I can be okay that I didn't cover anything. Uh, if you ever watched this, or if you are going to watch it, let me know about a scene that sticks out for you. Maybe it's something that I didn't say because that's bound to happen. And I know there was some stuff that I didn't say 100% accurately to second description because there's some stuff that is weird to describe. Like there is to be the one point when we have like the reattachment of organs for that goofy guy that was in the bathroom scene, where all of a sudden he ends up just kind of like coming down as this weird like dog zombie because his body parts just look so weird and goofy and they don't look correct. And we had the moment where Maria and this one girl was like ripping like these legs apart and beating people with them, beating zombies with them, which I thought was interesting. So yeah, there is too much to talk about in this film, and so I'm sure there's going to be a number of scenes that I didn't get perfectly correct, whichever. Like the whole like spoon going through the guy's like face or head um, during that whole pudding situation with the tranquilizing pudding. Um, oh, there was another zombie scene where two zombies were going at it, because what ended up happening was one zombie ended up I think one zombie ended up getting like hit uh, with some kind of lawn uh, thing, like a rake or something, and all of a sudden that ended up just attaching one zombie to another forcibly, and so all of a sudden that made it look like these two zombies were just going at it, but I think one was trying to get away from the other zombie, I guess, but it just looked like they were going at it for whatever reason. um, but anyways, I'm going to get out of here. The weirdest thing that I've ever seen in my life is just two zombies in a seemingly normal zombie movie just going to town and creating baby zombie. I never would have thought that that would have happened in my life. But this is that movie. So I'm going to get out of here. Thank you, everybody, for staying however long that you did for this video. I'm going to get out of here. Bye, everybody. Bye, everybody.